The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is no substitute for professional care by your doctor or your qualified healthcare professional. Never disregard or delay professional medical advice because of something you've heard on this podcast or in any linked material. Guests who speak on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. Dr. Shirley neither endorses nor opposes any particular opinion discussed on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, practice, institution, or other entity with which Dr. Shirley may be affiliated.
Welcome to Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty. This podcast is curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD, as the definitive source of holistic wellness through beauty.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Shirley. Welcome to 15 Minutes of Fab, a segment of the Forever Fab podcast where I review products, services, experiences, and frankly, whatever, in 15 minutes or less. If the full-length podcast is a couture dress, for example, then 15 Minutes of Fab is like a button-down French cuff white shirt paired with leather leggings. If you don't have time to tune into the full-length podcast, then check out 15 Minutes of Fab, just a small dose. Some have considered it truth and beauty or plastic surgery secrets or as a nerdy or academic take on wellness and beauty with a dash of fashion. Consider it what you may. My aim is to engage you as a credible and authoritative voice in most, if not all aspects of beauty and wellness with a dash of fashion. That includes products, wellness services, technologies, innovations, new scientific research, and plastic surgery. As the founder of Holistic Plastic Surgery, my approach to beauty is through a lens of wellness that's grounded in science, backed by medical study and research, strengthened by my clinical experience, and bolstered by my surgical training with the use of principles and techniques of plastic surgery. And then there's my love of fashion. Of course, I feel uniquely qualified to talk with you about beauty, wellness, aesthetics, and plastic surgery, as well as products and services within those spaces, not only because of my extensive, and may I add, expensive training and expansive background, but also because I'm one of you. Many of the human issues around aging and being a fierce fab person, as well as an agent for positive change, I live these too, and I try. You're not alone. So together we can help the world become a more beautiful, forever fab place. So if you'll have me and give me at least 15 minutes of your time, let's get at it. In this new year, I've decided that it will be one of expansion and discovery. So I'll explore all sorts of topics, near and possibly far-fetched, while still focusing on the topics that make the Forever Fab podcast, well, fabulous, namely fashion, the art of living well or wellness, and beauty. As part of my philosophy of holistic plastic surgery, which I created well over probably now 15 years ago, where I believe that beauty emanates from within, wellness plays an integral role in my practice. And this goes for many aspects of life that help you to live in grace and beauty, including nutrition, exercise, products, services, technologies, mind, body, spirit, and science. The title of this week's episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast is Hats On, a Fashionable History of Women's Hats. This podcast episode is dedicated to hats. Attending this event has been on my wish list for years. Recently, I attended the Royal Ascot in the UK, and of course, it was a heady affair. Women have been wearing hats for various purposes for decades. And so after attending Royal Ascot outside of London, where hats were central to the essence of the horse racing event, I decided to wrap my head around the history of women wearing hats. There were so many fabulous hats that I thought, oh my goodness, what is she trying to say? What is she communicating? And the men in the top hats, it was really kind of glorious. So for this episode, after having been inspired by the feathers, the fascinators, and the finery of Ascot, I'm briefly going to talk about the fascinating history of women wearing hats, from a symbol of piety or status to that of protest or street style. If you've ever seen photos or footage from the iconic Royal Ascot, you'll know that it's not just about horse racing. It's about headwear, glorious, gravity-defying, statement-making, fabulous hats. This will be the subject for today's 15 Minutes of Fab. According to an AI overview on the web, women's hat wearing has evolved throughout the years, from head coverings for modesty and status to prominent fashion accessories. The AI on the web continues with, other than Ascot, another new thing I tried was ChatGPT. I've had many people in my life, including the producers of this podcast, strongly suggesting to me that I should try ChatGPT because it's just like beyond AI, or maybe it is AI. I'm not sure. Yes, I'm late to the game. My hang up was that I just believe that what I'm putting out there should come from my own brain. While much, if not all, of my content does wholly come from my brain, except where I use direct quotes, of course, I have learned that AI and ChatGPT can help to do a few things, such as expand the content and depth of my content, extend the extent and the depth of my content. After all, I don't know everything. It can also stimulate ideas, and it can also save time. So some portions of this episode of this podcast originated from ChatGPT, but have naturally been modified by me, of course. So I continue. The key stages in women's hat history. From the early history and Middle Ages, head coverings were often mandated for religious reasons, particularly for women praying. Wider brimmed hats were worn outdoors for sun protection and status, and that's still the case these days. In the Middle Ages in Europe, for example, women were expected to show piety and cover their hair in public, often with elaborate headdresses like hennins, which are those pointy cone-shaped hats. Now, these weren't only considered practical, they also communicated wealth, virtue, and femininity. More info from AI. In the 16th and 18th centuries, hats became much more structured, and they were influenced by male aristocratic styles. The millinery profession emerged, with specialized artisans creating hats and accessories. Hats were adorned with feathers, lace, flowers, and other embellishments. Oh boy, that sounds so amazing. And the 18th and 19th centuries were actually considered the age of opulence, so the hats followed suit. Marie Antoinette helped usher in an era of high hairstyles and hats that defied logic and gravity, because those hats had to somehow fit around all that puffery on their heads. The 19th century was the Victorian era, and so that was when modesty returned. But not only did modesty come back, so did structure. The hats became smaller and more intricate right after the large architectural hats that define the age of opulence. This is where also the golden age of millinery came about, and that brought about hats which became a major fashion statement, with wider brims and various shapes, elaborate decorations, and various colors. And in the early 20th century, hats actually became more closely fitted to the head, reflecting shorter hairstyles. For example, the cloche hat is a bell-shaped style, and that was particularly popular in the 1920s. But guess what? I just passed by a Prada window, and there were a number of cloche-style hats. So they're not totally gone, and they've made quite the comeback. In the mid-20th century, and actually beyond that time, hats gradually became less ubiquitous, though some styles, like the pillbox hat, remained pretty iconic. And hats continued to be worn for fashion, special occasions like horse racing at the Ascot, and as a form of personal expression. The 20th century marked revolution, rebellion, and the runway. So in this age, hats represented a visual echo of women's growing independence. Post-World War II brought back glamour with Christian Dior's new look, which featured wide-brim hats and nipped-waist dresses. Then came the 60s and 70s, and the hats suddenly fell out of everyday favor and everyday fashion. Hairstyles got bigger, social rules loosened, and hats were seen as a bit impractical and old-fashioned. And despite this mass abandonment of hats, however, headwear did make its way back into some women's closets. Some women wore hats in protest or as a symbol of Afrocentricity tied to identity and heritage. Also, in fashion circles, women in the public eye, such as Jackie Kennedy, Audrey Hepburn, and Grace Jones, they used hats as expressions of power and personality. VintageFashionGuild.org states that, quote, today a milliner defines a person associated with the profession of hat making. In the 18th century, however, a milliner was more of a stylist. Traditionally a woman's occupation, the milliner not only created hats or bonnets to go with costumes, but also chose the laces, the trims, and accessories to complete the ensemble. The term milliner actually comes from the Italian city of Milan, where in the 1700s, the finest straws were braided and the best quality hat forms were made. So I appreciate this craft of millinery. Ever since I was a young girl, I was fascinated by hats, and I wore them as an accessory to a fabulous outfit to complete my look. I've also worn them to various events and happenings, including the Kentucky Derby, summer parties in Newport, Rhode Island, fashion parties in New York City, weddings and funerals, and many other types of events. Now, today, modern royals have helped to keep that culture of hat wearing alive. When I was growing up and wearing hats whenever I wore them, people thought I was just a bit too different. But it didn't matter. I loved the hats, and I loved the way they made me look and feel. Queen Elizabeth II, for example, was never seen without a coordinated hat. And Kate Middleton has revived the popularity of the Fascinator. What has changed about women donning hats is the why. In these modern times, hats are less about social rules, covering up, or restraint, and more about statement, whether cultural, political, or fashionable, and also about identity and fun. So whether you're donning a Fascinator for a summer wedding or rocking a bucket hat at a festival, you're participating in a long and expressive tradition that has traversed adversity and oppression and emerged into freedom of expression and creativity. Women's hats have always told stories of status, rebellion, elegance, and identity. Do you wear hats? If not, will you try? Will you start? What stories would you be telling? What stories are you telling now, with or without a hat? I'll be sharing some of my favorite Royal Ascot looks and maybe a few personal vintage looks on social at ForeverFabMD. Check them out and share if you're a hat person too. Until next time, keep your head high. This concludes this episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay beautiful and forever fabulous, inside and out. Thank you for listening to this week's Forever Fab podcast episode of 15 Minutes of Fab. Until next time, live well, prosper, and stay beautiful, inside and out, and stay forever fab. If you like this episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast, please share it and subscribe to the feed. Did you learn anything new? Review this episode by writing just one word to describe the value you got from listening today, and give this episode a 5-star rating. In case you missed it, listen to this episode, past episodes, or check out who's coming up next on foreverfabpodcast.com. If you enjoy listening to the Forever Fab podcast, get more audio and more visuals with a membership through Patreon. Choose the gold, platinum, or diamond tier for premium added content, special co-hosts, lifestyle videos, branded merchandise, and more by visiting patreon.com/foreverfab. And if you are a founder of or represent a beauty or wellness brand, and you want to be featured on an episode of Forever Fab podcast segment of 15 Minutes of Fab, send me some stuff. Visit foreverfabpodcast.com and fill out the contact form. For general holistic beauty tips or to get set up an appointment with me to discuss your personalized options for leveling up your beauty, go to elementsandgraces.com and sign up for my newsletter. And for an online e-consultation on time, anytime, and on your time, visit clicklift.com for your wellness, plastic surgery, and beauty questions on the go. And it's time for the elevated house call, wouldn't you say? Jet Set Beauty RX offers beauty on-call services near your home or other domicile, delivering beauty in the privacy of a medically equipped, state-of-the-art mobile aesthetics unit. Reserve at jetsetbeautyrx.com. That's all for now. Thank you for sharing the love. Goodbye, gorgeous.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty, curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD. Live beautifully and help make the world a more beautiful place.